Welcome to the Main Character Podcast, where we share a collection of personal stories to create community and inspire real conversations. I'm your host, Brooke Taylor, and today's main character sharing her story is yours truly. Hello! I am so excited to share my own personal story. I didn't think it was very fair to have guests come on and be vulnerable and honest and share the hardest moments of their life when I wasn't willing to do the same, and I want you guys to know me better. So this is the only story episode that has a sweatshirt that will only be with one person, will only be me. We don't have a guest today, but there will be a crew neck launch today, the one that I'm wearing. Like always, you'll notice in every episode with a guest, we will always be matching in the crew neck that they designed and the one that's available to purchase with their episode. If you guys want to know more about why I started the podcast and what the podcast is, there's a totally separate video for that just talks about what the brand is and who we are and all of that good stuff and why I started it. But today we're just going to talk about my personal story. Let's just cut right to the chase. Let's dive in because there's a lot to cover. To start us off, I want to tell you a little bit about who I am. My name is Brooke Taylor. As you may have gotten from the intro, I am the host of this podcast and the creator of this brand. I'm the one behind everything that you see. I do pretty much all of it myself. I'm 24 years old. I live in Orange County, California. I was born in Houston, Texas, and I grew up in Connecticut. This brand is my little baby, and I work on it full time. My hobbies consist of DIYing, decorating. Before this brand, I wanted to be an interior designer. My passion is helping others, inspiring others, and creating. But my number one purpose is being obedient to God and centering Him at every decision that I make. All the rest you'll hear through my story. So with that said, let's start at the beginning. To make this story more clear, we're going to reference my biological dad as my father and my stepdad, my mom's second husband, as my dad. Just to make that clear because it can get a little confusing. So for this story to make sense, you need a little bit of context. So that goes from before I was born. My mom and my father met. Within a very short period of time, they got pregnant. Because they were pregnant, they decided to get married. As they were wedding planning, my mom unfortunately lost her baby and had a miscarriage. They decided to continue on with the wedding. It was already planned. They had already decided to do it. They got married. They got pregnant again shortly after with me. And then shortly after I was born, their marriage started having issues and they were separated by the time I was 2, divorced by the time I was 3. So that brings us to the first point. So all of this I can't speak from memory because I don't have any recollection of it. But it's important to the story because it impacts my mom in a way that affects her parenting of me and the beliefs that I have growing up. So with a preface of not remembering and only having details from stories that I've pieced together being told my whole life, my father had a criminal past that he had lied to my mother about. And as time went on, she learned more about his criminal past. They hadn't known each other super well before they got married. And my mom is so excited to have a baby. We were inseparable. She was in love with me, I was in love with her, but my father never really wanted to be a dad. And so he wasn't as excited that I was here. There started to be some infidelity as well as some criminal acts coming to surface that my father wanted my mother to be part of that she had no interest in being part of. Well, when she got in the way of him making money or carrying out these criminal acts, he was not too happy about that and got very upset. He started being angry and physical with her. He physically hurt her. He put me as an infant in potential danger. He was just not a responsible man and definitely an irresponsible father. He was very selfish. He was very manipulative. And although I don't remember him being this way, I later learned for myself these characteristics of him that we will get to. All of these behaviors created a fear in my mom. She was in love with me and doing the best she could possibly do, but she was afraid that he would hurt me. He would she was afraid that he would try to take custody of me when they were separating. She was afraid of what she didn't know because of his past and so many lies had been told to her. There was fear all around. After they were separated, she was desperately wanted things to work out with him so that I could have a father, and she tried to make things work with him, so much so that she left Texas and moved to California to try to make things work with him. But it got to a place that was so unhealthy and a potential life risking situation for both her and for me. She took me and she ran. She ran away because she didn't want him to hurt us. She was terrified of him. Shortly after, she leaves California and goes back to Texas. At this point, I'm about 3 years old, and she meets my dad. At this time, my dad was actually going through his own separation from his previous wife. And he had 3 children with her, my 3 older stepbrothers. Their divorce was very drawn out. It took 5 years for them to get divorced. A big legal war, a big war in general. And although I didn't know the details and I wasn't part of it, I did see my dad struggle with anger and depression and sadness, and I saw him feel so much guilt about what he was doing to his 3 sons. And this was a big deal to me because I felt like the kid that he had to deal with and accept because he wanted to be with my mom. That I was just kind of part of the package, but not really what he wanted, and kind of something he just had to take along for the ride. And I'd watch him pour into his other children, prioritize them, spoil them, give them everything they wanted, go above and beyond for them. And I always felt like I came in 5th place. It was my mom and his 3 boys, and then it was me. But his boys were angry at him. They were angry at the divorce that was happening between their parents. They were angry about having to only see him on the weekends. They were angry. And because he felt guilty for that anger, he was overcompensating in an unhealthy way. And because he felt so much guilt, his focus was on them solely. And he knew that I was there and that I loved him, and he didn't have to work for it the same way he did with his boys. He was working for forgiveness from his boys, but he didn't need to do that with me. Now that I'm older, I don't actually think that it was about love. I don't think that he loved me any less. I just think that his focus and effort was in a different place. He was so consumed in this divorce, in his work, in feeling guilty and depressed and all these other things, that being a present dad to me wasn't his priority. I don't think that was ever his intention. I don't think it was his intention to not prioritize me. I just think that he was having his own struggles and own obstacles to deal with. And although I made it very personal, it really wasn't personal at all. And up until 2nd grade, it was just me and my mom. I was an only child, so I was used to having one parent and my mom having a boyfriend. At this point, I'm obviously aware that my biological father is not in the picture, and the story that my mom had told me as a child was that my father could have stayed my father and had a relationship with me and stayed in my life had he chosen to. But it was too much effort and too much work for him, and so he didn't choose to do so. And so from the beginning of my life, from the beginning of the time I can remember, it was this feeling of, well, my father could have chosen me, but he didn't love me enough to stick around. I wasn't a good enough child to make him be a father. I just purely wasn't good enough for him. At the same time, I'm feeling neglected from my new dad, who I feel like isn't really choosing me, but is dealing with me because he wants to marry my mom, and he has his own problems to deal with. And that, although maybe it wasn't the case, I already had this narrative of I wasn't good enough to be a daughter or wanted by my father, so I probably wasn't good enough to be a daughter and wanted by my new dad. This really boils down to perception, right? Because I know at this point in my life that my dad wasn't prioritizing me not because I wasn't good enough, but because he was dealing with so many other things himself. And I know that my father didn't be a father because he had his own problems that had nothing to do with me. But at the time, it very much felt like it was because I just wasn't good enough. This narrative dictated my life, dictated how I saw myself, how I acted towards people, how I perceived other people's actions and words towards me. And I don't want to give the wrong idea. Like, my parents, both my mom and my dad, loved me immensely, were very present, made sure I had everything I needed beyond what I needed. My dad came up from a family of wealth. And so he showed his love in a different way than I was used to receiving it. So his way of showing he loved me was buying me gifts. And I got all of the things that he thought that I wanted. But in reality, all I wanted was his time. And that's the one thing that I didn't get. So when I was 7, my parents got married. And in the same year, my mom was sick. She got really, really sick. And as I said, my mom really loved me and was obsessed with being a mom. And for many years, it was just the two of us. My mom went above and beyond with her time and with her love. She was class mom. She came on every field trip as a chaperone. She threw me extravagant parties for every celebration there was. I mean, we had Valentine's Day parties. We had half birthday parties. She really went above and beyond to not only give me everything that she could, when in reality, for the whole time that we were on our own, she was actually struggling financially, but I never knew that because she went above and beyond to make sure that I had everything I needed. And most of all, she gave me so much of her love and time. But at this point, when I'm in 2nd grade, my mom gets diagnosed with CML leukemia. And for those of you who don't know, basically leukemia is the cancer of your blood. So the type of cancer that she had was not a cancer that you go and you get chemotherapy or radiation and eventually you beat it. Because it's in your blood, the treatment is a little bit different. And when I was 7, she was given 5 years to live. Our world went from her being class mom coming to the pumpkin patch to her being in bed with all the lights off, having to be utterly silent because any amount of light or sound would hurt her. She was weak. She had horrible migraines. The very present mom was now in pain and hurting. And all I wanted was for my old mom to be back. Obviously, I'm 7. I don't really understand what's going on. And my dad, as I may have mentioned earlier, had a short temper. Is a very reactive person. So when something goes wrong, he is very quick to respond without much logic, without finding the solution, just kind of under attack. And he's always been this way. And at the time, he really struggled with anger problems. He was severely depressed. So he's finally finished this divorce and he's finally gotten married, but now his new wife is sick. And so his way of handling it was very different than mine. He wanted me to leave my mom alone, to let her sleep and rest and heal alone. And all I wanted to do was cuddle and lay with my mom. At this point, this creates a huge amount of independence for myself because all the things my mom was once doing, I now had to do for myself. I started making my own lunch for school and my own breakfast in the morning and just doing everything on my own and letting my mom rest. And when my dad told me to leave my mom alone, I didn't understand why. Because I was going to be quiet and I was going to keep the light off and I was going to just lay with her, and he didn't think that was a good idea. At this point, I was so confused as to what was happening to my mom. I was becoming very independent. I was very unsure of what life would look like. I was afraid that my mom wasn't going to survive. Now she's given an expiration date of when I'm 12, and everyone was just scrambling. We didn't know what to do. Our whole world was turned upside down. My dad is pouring all of his energy into work to support our family, to still maintaining his relationship with his boys that he only sees every other weekend, to taking care of his sick wife. And I'm just trying to make things easier. I'm trying to not get in the way. I'm trying to not call attention to myself. I'm trying to make everyone's life as easy as possible without being a burden. Fast forward to age 9. All of the same things have been happening. My mom has been sick. She's taking medicine, so she's able to be more herself than normal. She's not laying in bed anymore, and she's able to function, but still has struggles and side effects from the medication that she has to take. She's still battling cancer. At age 9, we moved from Connecticut to Texas because there's a really good cancer treatment in Houston, but we moved to Austin, and it was a really beautiful life, and it was a great new adventure, but at the same time, it created more independence because we moved there because of this cancer hospital. And so my parents would take the 3-hour drive to Houston for my mom to have treatment, and I would stay at my friend's house. And go to school and live at my friend's house for a week, and then my parents would come home and I'd live at home for a week, and then I would go back to my friend's house, and this cycle continued for a while. With the diagnosis that my mother had, she was not supposed to get pregnant, but she really wanted to have a second child. At this point, I'm 9, almost 10. Miraculously, she ends up getting pregnant with my little brother, and she goes into remission. So she's cancer-free, and she's pregnant, and she stops going to treatment, and everything is looking great. Well, my dad gets a job back in New York City, and he wants to be closer to his family, who all lives in Connecticut. So he moves. At this point, my mom goes on her own journey of spirituality, and up until this point, I had grown up going to church on some Sundays, mainly for Christmas and Easter, never knowing Jesus. When I asked questions, nobody answered them. And so my mom really went on her own exploration of what she believed in. So we started going to things with Tibetan bowls. She started playing with a Ouija board. She was just trying to figure out what was true and looking for answers. We stayed in Texas because my mom had her parents in Texas, and she wanted to have the baby with her parents. And once we had the baby, we would all move to Connecticut. So she is pregnant. She's exploring and playing with this Ouija board. And she starts to go down this rabbit hole. And she stops sleeping, and she just starts to rely on it in a way that is scary. For every good there is, there's also darkness. And so whatever she was exploring was not a good source. It was very dark. And it brought darkness into our home through a combination of being pregnant and hormonal and not sleeping and all of these things. One day she has a breakdown. And as I witnessed all of the things she explored and then how she acted on this one day, it freaked me out. Like, really, I always knew that spiritual things were real, and I knew what she was talking about and experiencing was real, and it scared me. Like, it really, really freaked me out. So from that day forward, I was like, I don't want any gifts. I don't want to talk about spiritual things. If I want to know part of it, the furthest I could get away from it. I didn't care. I didn't care about the afterlife. I didn't care about believing in something higher. I didn't care about any of it. Who cares? I don't want any part of it. So then she's fine. She sleeps, she gets rest, and everything's fine, whatever. And a few months later, we go to Houston where her parents live, and she has the baby. And then we go back to Connecticut, and I start a new school, and everything is great until my mom relapses. and she has to be hospitalized. And at this point, my brother is 3 months old and I'm 10. And I just started a new school and we just moved into this new house and now she's hospitalized. So now her cancer is back and this all starts again. And then she gets it under control and she relapses in when I'm 12. And so this kind of is a theme throughout my whole life where my mom gets really sick and I fear for her life and I don't know if she's going to be okay. And then she gets it under control and we keep on going. While we're on the topic of my mom being sick, she surpassed her 5-year death sentence and she's still alive and healthy and happy today. So at this point, my brother's 3 months old. I'm 10. I'm now in 5th grade. And I really start to see boys. Like, I start getting attention from boys. In 5th grade is when I developed. 5th grade is the first time that I was asked for a nude photo by another 5th grader. 5th grade is when I had my first kiss. 5th grade is the first time I had a boyfriend. And boys really became a big thing in my life. All of my friends were boys. I have always just been able to get along with guys easier than I was with girls. At this age is when I really started to notice the attention that I got and the way that that attention felt. At this age is when I really started to notice the power that my body had and that my appearance had and my attractiveness had. I wasn't able to get the relationships I wanted from girlfriends, and so I started seeking friendships with guys and started dating and looking for their approval. And because I had this underlying belief about myself that I wasn't good enough, when I got this attention, it made me feel like I was good enough, right? So I started seeking after that for other people's approval. That high of the power that comes along with getting attention. But at the same time, over the next few years, I'm getting all of this attention, but it has nothing to do with my thoughts, my personality, my mind, who I am as a person, my kindness. It had nothing to do with any of that. All it had to do with was my physical appearance. So I know that there's power in how I look. I know that there's power in my body and I can get attention, and that attention feels like I'm good enough, right? But then at the same time, it's leaving me with this emptiness because I know that people are only giving me the attention based on how I look and not who I am as a person, which is then feeding into the I'm not good enough because I'm only good enough for my body, but not for who I really am. And because it had nothing to do with who I really was, I was constantly changing who I was to be what those people wanted me to be, because all they cared about was what I looked like. And I wanted their approval and I wanted to be good enough. And I was so desperate for attention that whatever those people wanted, I conformed myself to lower my standard, obliged by what they wanted so that I was wanted. And in my head, I was so confused because I knew the person who was inside of me. I knew that I was lovable. I knew that I offered love to people and friendship to people, and that I was a good listener, and that I gave everything that I had. I knew that I was valuable, but I was so confused as to why other people were only valuing me for what I looked like and not for what was inside. Meanwhile, I always went for the hottest of hot guys, and it was like this sense of accomplishment when I got their attention. None of those people ever wanted to date me. They wanted to talk. They wanted me to do some sexual favor for them, which I didn't do. But that was their goal. And when I didn't do it, our relationship was over. And it just feeds into this, okay, why does no one want to get to know me better? Why am I not good enough? So then we have freshman year of high school. And I didn't have a lot of friends in high school. And then I entertained some boys, dated a bit, nothing serious. And then at the end of my freshman year, my first period in the morning was geometry at 7 a.m. And a senior boy would always come in every morning to talk to the teacher. And as I said, I always wanted the hottest guy. I definitely wanted an upperclassman. So I did my thing and I flirted with him. And sure enough, we started dating. And at this point, I'm 15 and he's 17. I was a freshman and he was a senior. And it's May, so school's about to end. And so right as school's ending, we become official and we proceed to date for the next 4 years until I'm 19. Summer after freshman year, I lost my virginity to him. At this point, he had graduated high school and I was going into my sophomore year. We spent a really amazing summer together with his friends. It was just a very fun high school young summer. And I started my sophomore year and he started college, but he didn't go out of town. He went to a community college. And every lunch I would leave school and he would pick me up and I would eat lunch with him and I would go back to school and finish my day and leave school at the end of the day and go to his house. And we spent every moment of every day together. At the same time, literally within a week or two of me starting to date him, I get a text on Twitter from this random woman. And she says, "I know your father." And I'm like, "Who are you? I don't know who you are. What do you mean you know my father?" Mind you, I have not spoken to my father since I was 2, whenever he left. And my mom had always told me I was not allowed to speak to him till I was 18. Remember, she's afraid of him. Even though it's been years at this point, like she still very much dislikes him, still has a fear of, we don't know who he is. I think she's crazy. I don't understand why she won't let me see my father. Well, at this point, I already know. Like I'm already talking to this lady. We start having a conversation. She introduced me to my father. And we start speaking. We start talking on the phone. We start video chatting. We start having a relationship. And at the same time, I'm starting this relationship with this boy. As I was dating this boy through my sophomore year and his freshman year of college year, it became unhealthy because he was my world. I would see him every moment that I wasn't at school. I started lying to my parents about where I was because I wanted to see more of him. I didn't have friends already my freshman year, so because I didn't have friends, he was the only person that I had. As I was growing up and becoming more independent, doing more things, my parents became stricter, so I started lying more. And I was still doing well in school, but I just had laser focus on him. And he was struggling with his own insecurities, crippling anxiety. He had his own slew of personal mental health disorders. But because I was so desperate to seek approval, and now this is my first real relationship, and again, I'm in love with him, he's in love with me, we're spending an unhealthy amount of time together. Because he was so insecure, he became terrified that I would cheat on him. And in turn became very controlling, very manipulative, just gave me a lot of rules that I didn't deserve, that I had never done anything to make him question me. I was very loyal, very honest with him, so laser focused on him, but he was struggling so much himself, and I was so desperate for him that I just complied and I shrank down, because if my light was shining too big, it would impede on his dark little bubble that he created for himself. So he shrunk me down. He spoke in a way that was very belittling, very limiting. He didn't have belief in himself, so how could he believe in me? He didn't have love for himself, so how could he truly love me? He always cared about me and had love for me, but he wasn't in love with me because he didn't even love himself. He was a very passionate person, so our highs were so high and we were the best of friends. But when he was upset or struggling mentally, our fights were just brutal and screaming at each other and just so manipulative, so controlling. to the point in which, like, I would have the ugly, weeping, that type of cry, the ugly one, the one they make Kim Kardashian memes about, that cry. And because he was older and because all I cared about was him, I started just becoming sneaky, breaking the rules that my parents had set. I felt like I was doing really well in school and that I should be trusted. So I just took things into my own hands and made my own rules. And at this point, it leads to a disconnect between me and my parents because they were not used to this version of me. I wanted their trust, but they didn't like my boyfriend and they didn't like how I acted with my boyfriend. So then they're putting more rules on me, which now just leads to resentment between both of us and lying between both of us. Meanwhile, I'm having this new relationship with my father. My father is very manipulative, as we learned at the beginning of the story. So he is totally playing the part of being this amazing guy, so loving, so generous. He's telling me everything that I want to hear. He's super supportive, super great at listening, just like so interested, being the best dad ever. I then turned 16 and he tells me he's going to buy me a car. Well, long story short, he never ends up buying me a car. And this theme of making promises that turn out to be empty and setting my expectations very high to only disappoint me turns into a theme through my whole relationship with him. My whole life, we moved a lot. Like, we would usually move every single year. Even if I didn't start a new school, we would move down the street to a new neighborhood. We'd always move. So at the end of my sophomore year, my parents decided to move us to Texas again. So we go to Texas. I'm very upset about it because I'm about to start my junior year of high school. I have this boyfriend that I've now been with for a year and a half that I'm in love with, that even though it's unhealthy, he was there with me while I was, growing this relationship with my father. And at this really critical time of my life, although he was not the healthiest when it came to me and him, he was a constant and a support system while everything else was going on in my life. So we end up moving, and my parents don't have jobs in Texas. They don't have a house. They don't really have anything. But my mom has family there, and the cost of living there is cheaper. And at the time, I just didn't understand why they couldn't wait 2 years until I was going to college to make this move. And I was very angry and upset about it. And when I would talk to my parents about this and ask them questions, they didn't really have an answer. And at the time, I was like, how irresponsible, why don't you have an answer to my questions? And as an adult now, many years later, I understand that sometimes you just have to make the decision that you know is best and figure it out as you go. But the main problem that I had was the lack of communication and just being so left in the dark while my whole life was being flipped upside down. So at this point, we're living in Texas and we are staying with my mom's brother, my uncle. And once school starts, it's now the fall, I'm starting junior year, my parents take my car because there's not enough parking spaces. And I'm sharing a room with my brother. And I'm still dating my boyfriend back in Connecticut. We're going to do the long distance thing. And I start school in Houston knowing that whenever my parents get a job and choose to move, we will go 3 hours either to Dallas or to Houston. Both of them are 3 hours away. But I was trying to make the best out of the situation as best possible, having no clue what was happening, knowing that any friends I made, I would just leave in a month. So I started school. And one day I'm at school and I get a call from my boyfriend saying that my parents called his mom in efforts to try to get us to break up. And at that point, with the lack of communication and the lack of knowing what was going on and being angry that we moved, that was really the tipping point of saying, okay, now you just went behind my back. Why do you care if I keep my boyfriend? We're not physically together. We're 2,000 miles apart, and he's providing stability and comfort to me in this time when everything in my life is changing. Why do you care? So the fact that they went behind my back and didn't trust me to make good decisions and trust in how they raised me really made me upset. So I decided to drop off my dad's car that I had driven to school that day and go stay at a friend's house until my father, who lived in Austin, which was 3 hours away, could drive down to Houston and pick me up and bring me to his house without telling my parents where I was going. I ran away. Like, just didn't show up from school one day. I texted them, told them I was safe, that I wasn't coming home, and then I turned my phone off and didn't tell them anything else. So I go stay with my father for 10 days. And in the state of Texas, after 10 days, if you don't continue to go to school, you are a high school dropout. Well, obviously I didn't want that. So I started school in Austin. And then on the second or third day, the cops show up. And they're saying that you're harboring a runaway and that they're going to take my dad to jail and that I'm going to go to jail and all of these things. At this point, my parents drive from Houston to Austin and they pick me up and they take me to a mental hospital saying that I'm having a nervous breakdown. And at the hospital, they're like, you're fine. I went for like 4 hours and they're like, okay, you don't need to be here. Well, my parents at this point think that I'm going crazy, and in reality, I'm just mad at them for all of these things. And I just wanted stability. That's all I wanted, and to know what was going on. But at this point, they're so angry at me. I'm so angry at them. Neither of us trust each other or like each other. And I decide that I am no longer going to live with them. I am not going to start a third junior year in September. I'm not going to do that. So I just tell them, like, if you keep me here, I'll just run away again, to let me live with my biological father. And I also, besides being upset with them, I really wanted to get to know my father. I hadn't known him my whole life, and I wanted to know more about myself and where I came from and just create a relationship with him. And here's where the backstory comes in, because all my mom's biggest fears are coming true. She knows that he's a liar, a manipulator, that he has this criminal past, that he doesn't always make the most safe decisions. And I'm over here thinking, I got this, I'm cool, I have a good head on my shoulders, everything's going to be fine. And she's over there thinking, I don't know what's happening, this man's stealing my child and manipulating his way into her life. I don't see it that way at all at the time, but anyways, my parents agree, and I move 3 hours away to live with my father. Right off the bat, I decide I'm going to be homeschooled. I'd always taken really advanced classes, and my father says to me, hey, like, you kind of have already done everything that you need to accomplish in high school. Why don't you just start college? And so I took a college entrance exam and I got in and I got my GED. So I graduated a year and a half early, which realistically was only about 4 months earlier than I should have, because originally I was held back. So I graduated with the people who were my age and the class that I was supposed to be in. But I did not finish my junior or senior year in school. 2 or 3 months after moving in with him, we decide that we're moving to California. I'd always wanted to live in California, and I never really wanted to live in Texas, so this was my opportunity. And my father is originally from California, so he wanted to go home and be by the beach. We were literally going to live like a block from the beach. Why wouldn't I want to go do that? So we made this move. My mom's even worse fear is coming true, because now not only am I a 3-hour drive away, but I'm a 4-hour plane ride away. Very quickly, I realized that all of the promises that he had made of buying me everything I wanted and being this amazing father in this peaceful environment, very quickly I realized that was all a show and that I got played. And he hated my boyfriends, and he hated that I was always on my phone trying to communicate with him. So that created issues. There was a lot of harboring feelings of, why weren't you there for me? Why weren't you my dad? Why wasn't I good enough? All of these things. He fed me all these new stories that contradicted the stories that my mother had grown up telling me. All these answers to the questions that I had that he was giving me were different answers than my mom gave me. All these beliefs that I had about myself and this life of not being good enough were now completely different answers from him. And he turned it around on my mom, So literally all my mom's worst fears were coming true, but I didn't know that. I believed what he said. I thought my mom was lying, and I had no trust and faith in her after this whole move and, being upset with her. So he was just playing into that. The tension between me and my father starts to rise. Me and my mom were not on speaking terms for a few months after I moved out. Whenever we did speak, it was fighting, and she harbored so much anger and hurt from me running away. And I harbored all this anger and hurt from her blaming me and from her being upset with me and not recognizing her part in it. So I just felt like she was putting all this blame on me, but it was a two-way street and we both made mistakes. And I was very upset that she wasn't acknowledging that. And I was very upset with how she called the police on me and took me to this mental hospital and wouldn't listen to anything that I would say. And I just felt so unheard and unseen. And so we were angry with each other for a long time. And we did not have a good relationship really for that whole year. And then on my 18th birthday, I went to Connecticut. And I went to go see my boyfriend after a year of not seeing him. And it was the most amazing week until I found out that he had cheated on me 3 times while I was gone. But I knew that I was gone for a year and I chose to forgive him. And I came back to California and I just knew I didn't want to be here anymore. I wanted to be with him. At this point, we'd been together for 2.5 years. I was ready to go home, back to him, back to my old life in Connecticut. The second that I went on my first trip to go see him, in my father's mind, it was over. Like, you're going to pick your unhealthy relationship with this shitty boyfriend, and I'm not going to support you. I'm not going to be part of your life anymore. So when I got back from my trip, he goes, here you go. Here's a plane ticket. I'll ship your stuff. Goodbye. So I go to Connecticut. I don't talk to my dad again for another 1.5 years. And I continue to date this boyfriend. And when I moved out on my own in Connecticut, away from all my family, the only person I knew was a few of my old high school friends, but I didn't have a lot, remember that, and my boyfriend and his family. Me and my mom fixed our relationship. At this point, now I'm on my own. I don't know how to do anything on my own. I don't know how to pay bills. I don't know how to do anything, set up a phone line. I don't know how to do anything. So at this point, I'm like calling my mom every day, Mom, I need help. What do I do? And we have a good relationship. Since then, we have really created a really great relationship over the past 6 years or whatever it is. And now she's like my best friend. Now we talk almost every day and she knows every detail of my life. But we definitely went through it for a little while there. So I'm living my life in Connecticut for the next 1.5 years. It's fall. So my birthday is in August. So I moved back to Connecticut at the very beginning of September. And I start working. I have my own apartment. I end up having to move out of that apartment, get a new apartment with a roommate, and she ends up being a crazy roommate. And at the end of my lease with her, I was going to move on campus into the college that I was transferring to. I was going to community college, paying my way through community college, and working at the same time. And my goal was at the end of my sophomore year, I was going to transfer to a different college in Connecticut. This whole time, me and my boyfriend are still very unhealthy. His insecurity and mental health is going down the drain. Our relationship's going down the drain. He's very obviously seeking approval and attention from other girls. And I always knew he would like flirt and talk to other girls, but I never thought he would do anything about it because I knew he was so insecure. I didn't think that he'd have enough confidence to go out and find a girl to hook up with. Well, it turns out this whole time I'd moved back to Connecticut to be with him. He ends up sleeping with like 8 different girls. In May the following year, so coming up on our 4-year anniversary, our relationship's so down this drain, so unhealthy and toxic and manipulative and belittling and controlling and all these things that we decide to break up. And it's this whole horrible, toxic mess. And I knew that the only way that I was going to end this cycle of toxicity was to leave. I also knew that we accept the love that we think we deserve. So this thought of not feeling good enough is why I was tolerating this toxic love relationship, whatever you want to call it, from this guy for so long. For 4 years, I just took his verbal and mental abuse. And I was just going through this cycle, and I knew that it was so unhealthy, but I wasn't worth more than that. I wasn't good enough for anything else. And he would always tell me, like, no one will ever love you the way that I do. You'll never get someone better than me. He was just feeding into the lies that I had already believed about myself. So I knew that in order for me to change the love that I thought that I deserved, I would have to fix my relationship with my father. So after not speaking to him since I moved there, so a year and a half had gone by, I call him one day and he says, hello, like, what do you want? What's up? And I was like, hey, like, when are you free? I'm coming to California and I'm going to see you. So we planned a trip. I had the summer to kill, right? My lease was up in May and I was moving on campus in September. So I had 3 months to kill. And so I knew I had to fix this relationship. I also knew that I wanted a change of environment. I wanted to explore, and I always had a heart for volunteering. I had gone on mission trips earlier in my life. I wanted to serve somewhere. So I booked a 6-week volunteer program in Bali. So my plan was go see my dad for a little bit, go to Bali, come back, spend the rest of the summer with my dad in California, and then come back to go to school. My father is a person who's like on the pier with his wife, drinking all day long. He's a day drinker, a partier. That's just his vibe. He had a friend who was in his 30s. And you know me, I like the older boys. So I end up being interested in one of my father's friends. And he invites me to his mansion in the hills. And I had been warned by my father and his wife that he was a little bit of a partier, a little bit of a player, slept with a lot of girls. But in my head, I'm like, oh, I got it. It's fine. I know my boundaries. I'm really good at keeping them. Nothing's going to happen. We're just going to go have a good time. But instead of me going to his house by myself, like, let me bring a friend, and so it can be like a little group thing. So we go and we end up going swimming. And in the pool, he's being like very touchy. He keeps like putting his arms on either side of the edge of the pool. So like I'm in the center and his arms are like around me, and I kept having to swim underneath his arms to like get out of it. And he was just very touchy and physical. And I'm the type of person who I do that alone. Like I am not gonna be physical in a way that's makes someone I'm with uncomfortable. I just don't think that that's like a nice thing to do to your friend and make her feel awkward. So I'm just not about that. So I was a little uncomfortable by that. I was interested in him and liked him, but not to the point in which that was okay. But it wasn't like a huge issue. I just kind of played it off, kept removing myself from the situation. And so the day is coming to an end. He says, like, let's go get dressed and we're all going to go to dinner. He had a friend there too. It was like 4 of us. And so I go into this mansion and I go get in the shower with my bathing suit on because I'd worn like a one piece with shorts. And so my one piece was my top. And I go in the shower with my swimsuit on. And I was just going to rinse the chlorine off, put some soap on, and then get out. Well, he came in to the shower with his swim trunks on. I was like, okay, he's going to rinse off, whatever. Well, then he takes his swim trunks off. I'm like, oh, maybe he's like really comfortable with his body. Like, who cares? Well, then he starts to like get more physical. And again, like I'm interested in him. So I'm like, okay, this is fine. But like my friend's outside waiting and like we're going to dinner. And, maybe once she goes home, like we can hang out later. But now is not the time. No. So although he was like really trying, I said maybe later. And I turned off the shower and I leave the bathroom to go get dressed in the bedroom. And I'm like, okay, I've made myself clear. Like he gets the point. Well, anyways, he comes in the bedroom and doesn't get the hint and forces himself on me. And I'd always heard stories of people talking about being raped, but in my head, I always thought it was like this big guy holding you down, you're kicking and screaming, but I was interested in this guy. And in my head, I was like, wait, I don't want this, but I'm interested in him. So did I like give him the wrong signal? I had no desire to scream. I just kind of like laid there like a doll. And like while he's doing whatever he wants, I just say the words like, you do realize that I don't want this, right? Like, I don't want you to be doing this. And his response was, so you're not going to let me finish? I'm sorry, I never wanted you to start. Like, what? Anyways, I was like, no. Like, I don't know. And so he stops, and I get up and I put my clothes on, and I walk out of the room and I find my friend, and we walk to like this different part of the property where nobody can really see us, and I just start crying. And I was so confused because, like, I guess I didn't realize that rape could be by someone that you were interested in or someone that you cared about, or like I just had a different image of what that looked like. And I was sitting there with my friend and I'm crying. And I'm like, why am I crying? Like, I was interested in him. I liked him. And she said to me, she's like, because you didn't have a choice in the matter. You didn't get to say yes or no. And the reason that I wanted to talk about this was because I have a lot of friends that have either been raped or been sexually assaulted in some way. And it all boils down to the idea that you don't get a say in the matter. And someone else gets to choose what happens to your body. I wanted to talk about this thing that happened to me. Not that it's like so prevalent to my story, but because I think more people than we know have experienced something similar to this. Whether they were raped or sexually assaulted in any capacity, this is so common where a guy will think that you're interested in him and that your no means I'm playing hard to get, because that was it. Like, he didn't realize that he was raping me. He thought that this is a game. This is her playing hard to get. And he was so used to getting all the girls he wanted, getting whatever he wanted, that in his mind, he didn't realize what he was doing. And this by no means excuses him, but I just wanted to shed light on the fact that there's an entitlement and there's this expectation that sex is something that we can just take. And it's not that way. And whether you're playing hard to get or not, a no means no. The idea that like you're wearing something promiscuous or you're flirting or you're giving mixed signals, it doesn't matter. I could, at any point in the whole process, you have the right to say no and for it to stop. And I wanted to share this because the person who it happens to, no matter what they do, it's not their fault. And if you listening have gone through something like this, it's not your fault. And I wanted to talk about this too because rape doesn't look a certain way. It can be your husband can rape you, a stranger can rape you. Like, it can be aggressive, it can not be, it can be kicking and screaming, it can be there's like so many different ways that it could happen. In my head, I didn't realize that it could happen in the way that it happened to me. So that day I go home and I tell my father what happens. And he held me while I cried. And that was the first time that he had ever been parental and like comforting when I was upset. So that night I got on a plane and I went to Bali. And I had the most amazing experience in Bali. I'm freshly out of this relationship. I had just been cheated on with 10 different girls. So before, my idea of sex as a sacred thing that should only be shared between people who love each other is now, well, clearly that's not the case. Clearly it's so amazing that he had to go find it from all these different people. What's it about? I want to know what that's about. And so I had all different types of encounters. Not a ton, but a few different experiences because I wanted to know what was so appealing that my ex needed to cheat on me. And through that, I found really nothing. At first, I thought the appeal was that I was getting attention and these people were so attracted to me and enticed with me that it would be something more. And then once the sex is over, they go home and you never speak again. Like, what's the point of that? It was so unfulfilling. Didn't boost my confidence because it only made me feel more attractive, but and still like reiterated the I'm not good enough for them to want anything more from me than my body idea that I've had. And I had fun with the power of the flirting and the doing the dance at the bar and enticing them. But once I actually got to like the actual act of sex, without love, it's so empty. And so it brought me back to the original idea that I had about sex, that it really should just be between two people who actually love each other. Because sex is an intimate thing, and without intimacy, it's just emptiness. In Bali, on my second to last night there, I meet a boy. We spent 2 days together, and then I left, and he was from New Zealand and I was from America. And we were just very enticed with each other. I ended up falling in love with him. We would spend all day, 10 hours a day, FaceTiming each other. He came to America for me. We spent 2 really amazing weeks in America together. He ended up coming on my family trip with my father and his wife to Europe, and we spent another 2 weeks in Europe. And then we came back, and he went back to New Zealand, and it was this fairy tale story that you see in movies. And at the end of it, he got into the Air Force, which is 10 years in New Zealand, and we broke up. It was the first really healthy relationship I was in. And for the first time, he looked at me in a way that wasn't just about my body. And he looked at me in a way that I never seen anyone else ever look at me. And he was so interested in getting to know me for who I was and really seeing my worth beyond my appearance. So when we broke up, even though we only spent a very short period of time together, I was devastated, like so upset. Meanwhile, I've come back from Bali and I'm living with my father. And after my amazing trip in Bali, I decide I don't want to keep going to school. I was going to school for entrepreneurship. I was just going to learn, not for the degree, because I never had planned to work for someone else. My plan was just wanting to travel. I just wanted to explore the world. My father had this business where he would basically be a project manager of a lot of different contractors. And he had a lot of these businesses doing the same thing. And my father offered me a job doing what he did, managing a team of contractors. It provided me a really high salary for how old I was with no experience. It provided me a really flexible work schedule where I worked for 2 hours a day at home. And it seemed like this amazing offer that I could travel and do all the things I wanted and have enough money to support myself. So I agreed and I started this business. And then I learned there was a lot of hidden strings that I hadn't known about. He literally offered this package to me so that I would be able to travel. But then whenever I wanted to book a trip, there was all these rules about, well, are you going to have internet? Are you going to be able to work? Did you get your time off covered? I can't guarantee you that if you take this trip, when you come back, you'll still have a job. Like, just manipulating me, throwing things in my face, where I would literally ask for approval before I would book it, and then I would book it, and then it was like, hey, now that you've spent the money and you've bought your tickets, I can't guarantee you a job when you get back. And every time I would try to build my life and make plans and decide on things, he would pull the rug out from under me and throw things in my face. So now I'm doing this job, and although it has a lot of perks, the original intention of me taking it was to travel, and I really couldn't do that because my job was so unstable. And through working with him and also having some type of family relationship, because he really didn't ever act like a father or a dad, he really acted more as a boss / peer. I really learned more about his character. Like I had at this point, talked to him since I was 15, had lived with him previously for a year, but now living with him older, already had supported myself at this point. So I obviously knew how the world worked a little bit better than the first time I lived with him. Working with him and seeing him as a boss, but not only towards me, how he's working with other people, I really started to see all the things in him that my mother used to be afraid of. And not from a fear standpoint, I wasn't afraid of him, but I saw the manipulation. I saw the selfishness. I saw the bipolarness, the instability, the control. Every single one of his peers were on his payroll. And everyone would jump when he said jump, and everyone would come running the second he called, and everyone, including his wife, was just waiting on him. And the second they were no longer providing a service to him or helping his bank account grow, he cut them off. And I saw this with relationship after relationship of them just being dissolved in the matter of an instant. And this coldness and the selfishness that he only gave to people when he knew that his reward in return would be 10 times higher. He's a very smart man who's really a genius, but so self-absorbed that he didn't care at what cost things would cost him. So the more that I learned about him and watched how he treated people, the more I realized that the way he treated me was just a reflection of himself and who he really was as a person. It had nothing to do with me. He treated everyone this way. And so when we went to therapy to work through my abandonment issues, and his response was, well, it's all her fault. I had nothing to do with this. This is her problem, not mine. It became very obvious that this wasn't at all a me problem. He didn't leave because I wasn't good enough, but he left because he's just kind of a shitty guy. After about 2 years of us working together, I, at this point, have really started to see who he was as a person and realized that I didn't like that person. And he wasn't happy with how I was performing with the work. And honestly, I didn't really care about the work. I had only taken it to travel, and I wasn't even able to travel. We both mutually decided we were going to separate and no longer work together. And at that point, we also kind of stopped talking because at that point, our relationship had dissolved. We were only still talking because of work, and now we're not working together, so we kind of stopped speaking. This podcast is going live on January 10th. January 10th is the day that 1 year ago I got saved and accepted Christ into my heart. The things that led up to me going to church and my relationship with the Lord coming to place had nothing to do with my father, had nothing to do with either of my parents. But it did have to do with this foundational belief of myself that I was not enough, right? But the ideas that I had from a child, if I wasn't good enough to make my dad stay, I just diminished learning about who my father was, realizing that he was just a shitty person and it had nothing to do with me. So if that's what this lie was built on, well, I just shattered that foundation. This lie can't really exist anymore. But because that was the seed that I had watered my whole life, when my dad was too preoccupied and not pouring into me, when my brothers called me their stepsister and never called me their sister, when my boyfriends treated me like shit, when all these other boys only saw me for my body, all of these things I had used as fertilizer and as soil and as water to grow this seed into this massive tree. And so I needed to cut the tree down and realize it had no business being there. Through my whole life, I was very independent and I was totally seeking validation from others, but at the same time feeling like I'm like this amazing person, just nobody seeing my value and not understanding why nobody saw it. And then so obsessed with control, but I had done everything in my power to get the life that I wanted, to create the relationships that I wanted, the friendships that I wanted, all these things. Yet in all areas, it was failing. I had worked for my father for 2 years, and then a year had gone by of COVID and not working at all, to having no purpose. Like, I didn't have anything. All of these things that I wanted, I didn't have. And so when I went to church the first time, it was really only because I was tired of being isolated from COVID for the past year in Los Angeles with everything still shut down. And I just wanted to see people without a mask on. And in Orange County, the rules are a little bit less strict than in Los Angeles. And so I drove an hour and a half to go to this church to see a group of people without masks on. And that was purely the only reason I went. And I go and I feel the Holy Spirit's presence so strongly. And I just break down. I start weeping and I know that it's real. And on that day, I lifted my hand and I accepted Christ into my heart. And from that day forward, I've just been on fire for the Lord. I found a community very quickly of people who had the same values and same beliefs that I did. And I found friendships that actually cared about me on a personal level, not just for a fun time here and there whenever they felt like it or needed something from me, like all my previous friendships. But I created friendships that were genuinely concerned on my well-being, on celebrating my successes with me, giving me a shoulder when I was struggling, like really strong relationships. And I was finding something that I had never found anywhere else. And it started to bleed into all the areas of my life. It started to change how I treated other people. It changed my morals and values on what I thought was acceptable and the standard that I held for myself. I was seeing him work in my life in a way that I had tried to do everything in my power up until then, but I was seeing him work in a way and change things that I had spent my whole life changing, and he did it in a moment. There was no denying that he was real and was alive and was moving in my life and in all aspects. Over the next year leading up to this point, I start just wanting to know more. I'm already seeing fruit and I just want the tree to blossom. So I start to plant new seeds and start watering those seeds. At the same time, I'm chipping away at the old tree, cutting that down. This new tree is built off of the truths. I'm a very reasonable, logical person. And so in my head, my original tree had been planted on this, what was truth to me of I'm not good enough. But when that truth isn't valid anymore, I needed to find a new truth. And so I was searching for whatever that truth was. And because I was seeing the fruit that was happening in my life from the Lord, it just made me believe and see so much more. So because I was all in, the more I saw, the more I believed, because, they say seeing is believing. And the more I felt in myself change, the more confidence I had to give more trust to the Lord and surrender more, because the more I gave to him, the more I changed for the better. So over the next year, from last January to now, I just wanted to learn as much as possible. I would watch sermons daily. I would read my Bible. I would ask questions that in my whole life were never answered, were finally being answered. I wanted to know truth. I wanted to know more and more and more. And the more I learned about God, the more that I learned about myself. The more I learned about how he created us and created me individually and you individually and every single person, the time he spent making us, the attention to detail, the reason why every single part of us is part of us was created intentionally. And so if I knew that God was real and I knew that Jesus was real, that would mean that his word and his Bible is real. And so if that's real, then what's in it must be true. And if our God is our creator, then his word must be truth. So logically, if his word is truth, it's going to overrule anything that I say, because I'm not God. I was created by God. The one who created me created truth. To me, that makes a lot more sense, because my truth is based off of the things that other people have told me. My truth was based off of my life experiences, whereas God's truth is based off of him, because he created it. And there is no ifs, ands, or buts. My truth is going to be different than your truth, and it's going to be different than Sally down the street's truth. His truth isn't different than anyone's, because his truth is truth, period. Realistically, what we say our truth is all opinion based, and it's not really fact. Whereas the Bible and what that says is fact. It can't change. It's law. It's done. Like there is no, it can be interpreted for sure, but the one who created it doesn't change. Therefore, that's true. So if the Bible and if Jesus and if the Lord said something about me, then that automatically trumps what I said about myself. So if I said about myself that I'm not good enough, or my father said that I'm not good enough, it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't matter if Sally, my mom, anyone, it doesn't matter if any of those people said something about me, because it's not true unless it's exactly what God said. And God said that I was enough. God created me on purpose. God created every single part of me with intention for a specific reason. And so for me to go chasing approval from some other guy who is only going to give me approval based off of their own opinion is mute and pointless, because I should be running after the approval of Jesus. And Jesus, the funny thing is that I have to work for approval and for love from all these other avenues, but I don't have to work for love from the Lord, because He already loves me without me doing a single thing. It doesn't matter if I make a mistake. It doesn't matter if I make a bad decision, because we're human and He expects that of us. He will still love me no matter how wrong I do. So by learning about the love that He has for me and what His idea of me is and how He sees me, no human on earth is capable of seeing me. And so if I can see myself the way that He sees me and base my truth in Him, then the tree that I had once planted and not being good enough is cut down in an instant, is suffocated. This whole time, my whole life, I felt like I was this little light and I had so much to give. And I remember being a child and giving advice to my dad, who was struggling with depression, about, the joy of life and all these things. And I knew these things about myself to be kind and loving and sweet and confident and more than enough. I knew these things about myself, but because I felt like nobody else saw those values, and because boys were seeing me for my body and never wanting to know who I truly was, and because I didn't have any good friendships, and because my relationship with my parents was all over the place, I knew that I was this light, but I felt like everybody had sunglasses on. I felt like I was the sun and everybody was in their houses with the shades shut, thinking it was night. Like I felt like everyone else thought it was night. And so because I felt like I was the odd one out and I was seeing something that nobody else saw, I needed to change to fit in, to be popular, to be cool, to be accepted and liked, to make friends. And yet the more I tried to do that, the worse I felt about myself, the more unauthentic I felt about myself, the more I felt like a fraud. And it didn't even bring me better relationships. It got me attention for a few moments and then it was fleeting and gone. But once I truly learned that God created me on purpose, that it would be a disservice to Him if I changed myself, because if I change myself, then I'm going directly against what He said and designed me to be. If He designed me to be every way that I am on purpose, if I change one of those things to appease someone else, I'm displeasing Him. And so knowing that His approval is the highest approval that I could seek would mean being 100% authentically myself and loving that and loving me for everything that I am. So by knowing God's truth, it's only pulled out the truth I knew about myself and aligns the two. And never in my life have I felt more peace, have I felt more contentment, have I felt more joy. And even though this past year since I've been saved has not been an easy one, and a lot of challenges and struggles have come up in my way, I've had a peace that far succeeded anything I've ever felt before, because I know the truth and there's no argument in the truth, and I know who I am and I'm aligned and I'm authentic to myself, and I don't have to change for anyone, and I don't have to seek anyone's approval, and I can be unapologetically me. And if somebody likes it, then they'll be in my life, and if somebody doesn't, then they won't be in my life, and that's their choice. But that their approval should not dictate who I am and how I behave. Their approval should not dictate the thoughts that I have about myself. I feel a newfound freedom that nothing else has ever given to me. Having meaningless sex, partying, drinking, trying drugs, self-serving, all of these things, none of them have given me freedom, have given me joy, have given me peace. If anything, they've left me more empty than I was before I did them. And this instead actually fuels me and gives me energy to keep going and to keep my feet planted firm when life throws its waves and its storms at me. I'm able to withstand that storm and not get tossed around in the waves because I have a foundation built on truth. The truth sets you free. Knowing what you were created for, knowing your intention, knowing that every part of you is there on purpose, sets you free. You were created in His image. I was created in His image. Think of Him as a clay maker molding a sculpture, putting every little detail on there intentionally. He picked and chose what He wanted to be a part of you. Like creating a concoction when you're cooking in the kitchen, you choose what spices go in. You know how the flavors are going to work together to create this ultimately satisfying dish. He created you in His image with a specific purpose for the intention that He has on your life. And He created you differently than your neighbor because each thing that is inside of you is there for your unique purpose. You are different from everyone else for a reason, and that is supposed to be glorified. That's supposed to be a good thing. And instead, we all want to be like each other and compete, and we're jealous of each other. But instead, if we actually just appreciated the gifts that God gave us and use those to glorify Him, then that's where we find our joy and our purpose, because we're using the gifts that were given to us instead of comparing, instead of seeking something that's unobtainable, instead of striving for something that isn't us. When we live authentically to who we are at peace. You were created full of light. Our God is the purest form of light, and the enemy is the purest form of darkness. And it's constantly a battle. But when He created you full of light. You are the light. You are the light of the world. So my verse is Matthew 5:14 through 16. You are the light of the world. Like a city on a hilltop that cannot be hidden, no one lights a lamp and then puts it under a basket. Instead, a lamp is placed on a stand where it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your good deeds shine out for all to see, so that everyone will praise your heavenly Father. The reason that I chose this verse is because I always felt like someone was dimming my light, was trying to take my light and put it in a box. And I liked this verse so much because, just like it says, you don't take a lamp and put it in a closet to light up the closet. You instead put the lamp on a stand so it lights up the room. And just like you as a human, you are full of light. No matter what anyone tells you, no matter what other limiting, diminishing beliefs or labels somebody has put on you or spoken over you, those are all false. They're all lies. The only truth is that you are light. You are the light of the world. You were fearfully and wonderfully made. God has an intention for your life, and He gave you the gifts to use them to glorify Him. Just like you create a light bulb with the intention to light a room or a space, He created you with the same intention to light the space around you, to light up your community, to light up your family, light up your friends, to light up your workplace. Every area of your life, you are meant to be a light, to bring joy and positivity and spread the light of Jesus. And the only way you can do that is if you take the light out of the box that other people have put you in, that you've put yourself in, and allow your light to shine, because I can guarantee you, 100% promise you, that the light inside of you will impact others for the good. God did not create you to hide away, to be placed in a box, to have limiting beliefs. He created you to have an impact. So for me, this perception that I had only fed into this narrative that I told myself that continued put me into more and more and more boxes. So my light just kept getting dimmer and dimmer and dimmer until the flame was barely hanging on. And as I've learned about the intention that was put into the design and creation that I am, the more boxes I can shed off, the brighter my light shines, the more impact I'm able to have, the more joy and love and peace and happiness I'm able to share with others, the more impact I can have on others and bring them up and help to shed their boxes and help their light to shine brighter. That is my purpose. That is why I have this podcast. That is why I'm running on fire for the Lord, because I lived in darkness for so long. I believed that I needed to change for others. I believed that I was not good enough. I believed that I needed to shrink myself down, to belittle myself, to be good enough, to be worthy, to deserve goodness, to deserve more. I needed to change, and instead, those were all lies the enemy was feeding me. Instead, the truth is, I actually need to embrace who I am against what all these people are saying. I need to find the people who love me for who I am. And if they don't, that's on them. That's because my light is too bright shining on their darkness, and they want to keep their darkness dark. And so that's affecting them. That's not my fault. I don't need to get dimmer. They need to deal with their own problems by themselves, and I need to keep shining. Just like the sun keeps shining every day, even though there's night, even though people maybe want to sleep during the day, even though people may close their blinds, that doesn't mean that the light is not shining outside. If other people want to shut their blinds, that is their choice, but that does not mean that you have to stop shining. The sun does not stop shining as brightly because somebody wants to go to sleep. Do not be a candle that can be blown out whenever someone is done with you, whenever someone wants to turn your light off. Do not be a lamp that has an off switch. Be a light that shines no matter what time of day, no matter what season you're in. Keep shining, because that is who you are. By you being your truest form, most authentic version of yourself, the best version of yourself, the brightest light that you can be, you will light other people on fire as well. Just like with a match, when you light a match, the match can then go light the wicks of a candle. That is the same as you. If you get lit up just like that match, you can go light other people's candles. And then those people can take their light and light other people's candles, and it can spread. I lived in darkness for so long, and I do not want you to continue to live another day believing lies that other people have spoken over you. I don't know who you are. I don't know anything about your life, but I do know the truth, and the truth is that God created you on purpose. I do know the truth that God doesn't make mistakes. I do know the truth that you were fearfully and wonderfully made. And I do know the truth that you are the light of the world. If you are listening to this and you too have struggled with something similar to any part of my story, if you feel like you are put into a box, if you feel other people have labeled you in a way that it's not true to you, if you feel like you have to change who you are to make other people happy, I encourage you that after listening to this episode, you take some time, whether it's tonight or in the morning or whenever you get a free chance, you sit down and you spend some time with yourself, really asking yourself who you are. Not who other people want you to be, not what other people told you should be, but who you are, what makes you happy, where you feel the most fulfillment and joy, where your passion is, what excites you, what do you really want? You, Not what your mom, your dad, your sister, your brother, your friend, your boyfriend. No, no. What do you really want? And then create a list of characteristics about things that define you. Not what other people spoke over you, but characteristics that you truly know about yourself, even if you haven't seen those characteristics in a while, even if maybe you haven't been acting that way lately, but you know in the core of who you are, those things are you. Write those out. Take some time to remind yourself of who you are. Don't let society, the world, relationships tell you who you are. You need to know who you are, and everyone else can either support you and love you, or they can leave. And I know that's hard, but living authentically to who you are and your purpose and your truth, but living authentically to who you are is 10,000 times better than living a version of yourself to appease someone else. I promise you there's more out there. I promise you that there are people who will love you just the way you are. And if there's not, Jesus loves you, and that is enough. I still struggle with not feeling chosen. Instead of bringing me the pain and hurt that it once used to bring me, it's okay, because even though I'm not getting the effort levels from other people that I want, it doesn't change how I view myself. It doesn't dictate my worth, because my worth isn't reliant on other people's approval anymore. And my greatest hope for you is to have that same freedom, to find your truth in something greater than other people's approval. Because I will tell you right now, their levels of you being a priority, their love for you, their approval, their opinions, all of those things will change. When someone's opinion of you changes, when you do something that someone doesn't like, if your worth is in that, you're giving the power to someone else to knock you down in an instant. But when you take that power back and know your worth separate from everyone else, your foundation will not change on someone else's mood. Your foundation will not change when someone else feels a certain way. Your foundation won't change when you're having a hard day, when you're struggling, when you're in a hard season. It will not change, because the truth does not change. That was my story. That is what I've learned and the freedom that I found. And I hope that it can inspire you in whatever season you're going through, whatever your story looks like. It may look very different than mine. I hope that you could take something away from this. As this is the first episode, I just want to say that not only was I vulnerable and talked about hard parts of my life, there's going to be many guests that come on and be vulnerable and talk about hard things in their life. Being vulnerable is not easy, and people don't share with the intention of being judged. They share out of a place in their heart because they want to help other people struggling. So if you're listening to this and you don't agree with something I said, that is totally okay. You don't have to agree with everything I say or what all these other guests have to say. But I just would appreciate for us to all build each other up and to help each other in need and to show each other love and grace and to create a space that is judgment-free. It is not up to us to judge, and by judging, we are only leading to more isolation, to people feeling more ashamed, to guests not wanting to come on and be vulnerable and share, because nobody wants to do that if they're going to be judged. So I just ask you guys to keep that in mind as you listen, not only to my story, but to other people's story and how you respond. Just keep everything from a place of love, please. Now you know a little bit more about me, and I look forward to you hearing the rest of the episodes. Thank you guys for listening, and thank you for allowing me to share my story. Stay up to date on the next release by subscribing and following us on Instagram at Main Character Collection, where you can also find the link to purchase the crew neck I designed. And as always, remember, your story has a purpose.